welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I am one of your hosts today, Jen, and I am joined by my colleague. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Jody.
Hey, Jody. And we are here to talk to the author of an extraordinarily engaging, extremely hard to put down murder mystery in an extremely unique format that we are enjoying so much. So welcome to the show. Could we ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, my name's Antony Johnston. I'm actually known for several things. I created Atomic Blonde, for example, the movie starring Charlize Theron that was based on a graphic novel of mine. I write the dog sitter detective cozy mysteries, the Brigitte Sharp spy thrillers, but I now also write, yes, Can You Solve the Murder, which is an interactive crime novel where you make decisions. You play the part of a detective and you decide who to interview, what leads to follow, what evidence to gather, and ultimately who to accuse. So it's very exciting. It's something a bit different, combining those, sort of game plus crime novel. I also write video games, so that's where my expertise comes in to write this. And it comes out on July 1st.
Yeah, my first question is about, your prolific writing history and across so many different media. I'm really curious about what unique perspective you feel like comics and video games give to your prose writing.
I think really, more than anything, it gave me a really good grounding in structure. Because to write comic books, graphic novels, and video games, really to an extent, you need to have a very solid structure to begin with. You can't sort of go into it and free form it in the same way that you can with a novel. There are many authors who are what we call pantsers, as in they write by the seat of their pants, and just start on page one, start writing and see where it takes them. You can't really do that in graphic novels or video games, or screenplays, really, to an extent. So working in all of those media before I really sort of launched a mainstream fiction career, just gave me a really good grounding in structure and how to build stories, the shape of stories, and certainly the shape of stories that I like to tell, because I'm very much one of those writers who likes to write things that I myself would want to read, or in the case of games, would want to play. And so, having that structural knowledge has kind of helped me, write better novels, I think, but also very specifically with this particular book, it was invaluable because you can't write a novel like this without a structure in place first. It's simply impossible.
Yeah. Speaking of that structure, how do you start something like that? So it's for a kid from the 80s, this is more like the choose your own adventure, but plus. It's amazing because I'm more interactive. Instead of just flipping a page, I have to keep track of things. I have to make decisions. It's wonderful. I love it. But how did you come up with all the different sections? Of course, there's, your outline probably, but doing all that, how do you keep track?
Well, with a very large flowchart.
Oh.
So it's not an outline. So, I mean, I did outline as I normally would, sort of, writing out almost like a prose treatment, if you like, of the overall story of the book. But it is mainly a big flowchart, which I built online using a tool called Miro, which is often used in game production. That's how I first came across it. And just this massive flowchart with the 200 sections of the book all linked together with, arrows and various bits highlighted and the choices all branching off. And that formed the outline of the book. That was what I referred to. That was what I used when writing it. It was also what we used when editing it, which is highly unusual. Normally editors would not go anywhere near an outline or a flowchart. But for this type of book, it's actually kind of essential, because once you've written a draft using the flowchart and that structure, trying to then go back and do, large edits where you might remove a character or take out a subplot, which is perfectly normal in prose fiction. But in this kind of book, trying to do that is an absolute nightmare. It would take months to then rewrite after such an edit. And so my editors on the book actually used the flowchart. They edited the flowchart. They used that to sort of, and we had lots of discussions. We went back and forth. We had several group calls on Zoom to discuss their notes and ideas for how we could address them. But it was all initially based, on that flowchart. So that really is the essential part of this book, which of course readers will never see.
Oh, darn.
Is that another thing you feel like sort of comes from perhaps like comics and video games? Because I know that with like comics are extremely hard to edit in that like you're not just worrying about the flow of the story, but about like panel layout and page turns and like the rhythm of the actual like physical reading of the book. Yeah, like did the video games in particular with the flow charts, I guess, give you the sort of the vision to hold all these like different potential narratives in your head?
That's exactly it, yeah. Not so much with comics, actually, because what happens with comics is the script is edited before it goes to the artist. And so by the time it reaches the artist, things like editing, page turns or removing panels or adding panels, what have you, is generally already done. And so that's actually not so different to editing a regular book. It's just that you have all these multiple stages because of all the different collaborators involved. But video games is much more like this. Yes. Building this and plotting this and doing the structure was much more like making a video game in many ways than writing a traditional novel. Because, as you say, you have to hold all these things in your head. You have to be aware of the conditionals and the consequences and what we call the waterfall, where you change one thing and then suddenly that changes 10 things that happen later on. And because they're all split up in different sections throughout the book, that becomes rather difficult to edit and revise, and you really have to keep track of where everything is. So again, that's why I come back to the flowchart. It's so essential. But yeah, we use flowcharts in video games to write not just the narrative, actually, the design of video games as well, but certainly my specialty, the narrative of video games. We use flowcharts all the time. Sometimes there are some tools that literally use a flowchart to program the game. You're sort of working in a flowchart app, or an app that generates a flowchart, I could say, which plugs into the game system. That's actually kind of a bit beyond me in terms of how it works and the technical side of it. I'm really not very technical at all. But these tools do exist, and they mean that writers like me, who aren't massively technical, can work directly into a game in these big flowcharts. So yeah, that was something that I was very used to doing, and a structure that I was very used to dealing with when it came time to write Can You Solve the Murder?
So let's, if we can, talk a little bit about the characters and our inciting incident. I'd love to know about where our two main investigators came from, shaping them as characters and their relationship, which I really enjoyed reading. And yeah, could you tell us about shaping those characters and the sort of, it's not a spoiler to say, the murder that starts a murder mystery.
Yes, that's not a spoiler. That's
No.
right in the very first chapter. So, well, the main character is you. So actually, that takes quite a bit of sort of authorial sleight of hand, if you like, because when you read the book, you'll notice that the detective chief inspector that you are playing the role of is never named, is never gendered, is never addressed by race. It could be anyone, whoever you are. Anyone at all out there in the world, it could be you. And so that, as I say, that's a bit of authorial sleight of hand. So there isn't a huge amount of personality, because I want people to feel like, oh, this could be me. That said, a detective chief inspector doesn't get where they are without being smart and without being a good detective. And so, yes, the character is perceptive, a little bit world weary at times. You get the impression that this is somebody who's very experienced and has dealt with many cases like this before, but is nevertheless, sort of perceptive and understanding and sympathetic and just sort of open-minded, which you have to be really to solve a mystery like this, because there are so many possibilities on how to solve it. And then there's Sergeant McAdam. Ruth McAdam, who is your new sergeant. And in the book, this is the first case that you have worked together. She is a Scots Terrier of a detective, if you will, who was just transferred from Northumbria, which is the northeastern region of policing, which is just over the border from Scotland. And she's just transferred down. The book is set somewhere in the south of England. We never say exactly where, but, somewhere in that sort of Midsummer Murders like country. And McAdam is more of an attack dog kind of detective. She's quite belligerent. She's not afraid to speak her mind. She will confront witnesses and suspects and sort of harangue them a little bit. And you have to pull her back occasionally and tell her, this isn't quite how we do things down here. But it's quite useful actually having somebody else willing to make that step sometimes, willing to go a little bit further and put witnesses and suspects on their back heel. And so you make a good team. By the end of the book, you'll find that you make a pretty good team, assuming that, of course, you solve the case. And then there's Constable Zwale, who is a young uniformed officer who is very enthusiastic, very keen, wants to impress you. He's got his eyes on CID someday. He wants to be a detective someday, but he's very young and green at the moment, a little easily distracted at times, but nevertheless has his heart in the right place. And as I say, is very keen to please. So this is your core team, if you will. There's the pathologist as well, Dr. Wash, who's a very eminent veteran pathologist who features in the book a few times. But the McAdam and Zwale are your two constant companions throughout the case.
Dr. Wash is very fun. I like her. She's like, no nonsense. Oh, you're gonna insult me? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. When she and McAdam don't get on great to begin with, it must be said. But yes, Dr. Wash is perfectly capable of giving just as good as she gets.
I'm curious about all of the the suspects, because there is like a rather big supporting cast full of employees at the murder site and visitors. It's a health spa, so there's a lot of people around at all times, and you have to keep track of all of their histories and their potential motives and their alibis and where they actually were when things were happening as opposed to their alibis. How do you, this is sort of a question that I have about a lot of murder mysteries, but they require you to front load so much exposition. How do you make that feel, because you don't really know that that's happening when you read this book and in other great murder mysteries. How do you handle like loading in all that information while still, engaging the reader, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, that is the authorial sleight of hand that I referred to earlier. I mean, I'm glad that you're talking about it in that aspect, because one of the things I want to get across to people is that this is a crime novel. Yes, you're making the decisions and there is a game aspect to it, but it is, it's not short. It's just as long as any other crime novel. It features the same richness and depth of characters and the scenario and investigation as any crime novel. So I approached it, and I approached those sections where, as you say, you're kind of front loading exposition about characters, honestly, the same as I would in any other novel, using the same techniques, the same questions that will that seem natural but will help a witness or a suspect, open up and maybe offer a little bit more information while, as I say, still seeming like a natural conversation. That's just part and parcel of writing a crime novel. As far as I'm concerned. So that's very much using the same techniques. That's where the crime novel side of things, as opposed to, the game and that structure that we talked about, comes in. So it's difficult for me to articulate exactly how I do that. It's just something that, you get good at when you write a lot of mysteries. Something that comes with experience. Yeah, making those conversations seem natural and giving the reader everything they need to know without making them feel overwhelmed with information, and also not giving them things they don't need to know. I think that's an important part of that. That's something that I try quite hard to do in all of my mystery novels, is not tell readers things they don't need to know at that time. Now, of course, that's tricky, because if you don't tell them something and then later you do, smart readers will go, oh, that must be important. So you have to be careful about how you do that exactly. And also you just kind of flood the zone as it were, to use a term of art, by that's where red herrings come in. So yes, this thing I'm telling you is important, and I know you know it's important, but is it real or is it a red herring? And that you don't know. So there's all these techniques that we use to create great mysteries and write crime thrillers that, as I say, are absolutely relevant to how I wrote this book as well, because at its heart, it is a crime novel. You know, you could assemble a crime novel out of the correct path, if you like, through this book. You know, if I was doing it that way, obviously I'd write some things a little differently, but you could nevertheless create just a straight crime novel, taking out the choices from that sort of golden path, as we call it. Because, as I say, I'm using all the same authorial techniques that I would to write a regular novel.
How long from like start to when this became one of the books I'm holding now, like how long did it take you to get this all figured out, sorted, edited, published? Like how long does it take for one of these kind of novels instead of traditional? Or
Well, I think it normally takes longer than we did.
okay, good enough.
Because, so I first had the idea to do something like this, a little over 2 years ago, early 2023.
Wow.
And what I did was I first wrote a couple of short stories using the same sort of format, you know, but still themed around crime, just to see if it would work, you know, just to get an idea. Could you do something in this genre with this format, this choose your own story format? And the answer was yes, absolutely. And so at the end of 2023, I pitched this book to my agent in the pouring rain outside a pub at night in London. Don't recommend it. It was freezing cold as well, December. Don't recommend that path at all. But nevertheless, she liked the pitch and said, okay, well, send me something. And so I spent basically that Christmas and New Year. I didn't really have much of a vacation, much of a holiday. I just spent that time writing the pitch and writing what we call a partial, which is like 10,000 word. Well, see, normally in a novel, it would be the first 10,000 words of the novel. And here it was, except that I had to divide it up into, you know, sections with choices, because that's the whole point of the book. So that took a little extra time as well. We took it out for acquisition in February. It was acquired in March by Transworld in the UK, and then it was picked up by Penguin in the US the next month in April.
Oh, wow.
At which point I started writing. Well, actually, I'd started writing in earnest when it was acquired in March, but I knew that the US editors would obviously want some input. That's quite normal. And so when they came on board, then we really got stuck in. And then my deadline was the start of August. So I had basically just like three to 4 months, depending on how you look at it, to turn in my first draft. And then, you know, from there, obviously, we went through revisions and what have you. So, which is about how long I would take to write a regular novel most of the time. It takes me about 4 months to write a novel. It's just that for a book like this, normally I think you'd probably take a bit longer, but we didn't really have the time, you know, in order to get it in on deadline so that we could go through the publishing process of editing and proofreading and copy editing and what have you, getting things in catalogs, etc., etc. I couldn't have any longer than that. You know, I had to get it done that quickly. So sucks to be me, but you know.
But I'm happy that it got done.
Yeah.
Thanks for your work.
And what a fascinating revising and editing process it must be, because you are not just like reading the book over and over again, but you are playing the book over and over again. So yeah, that's like really fascinating.
Yeah, the copy editors, the proofreaders had a sort of an easier time, if you like, because they're literally just checking for grammar, spelling mistakes, you know, that sort of thing, punctuation. The copy editors, however, yeah, I didn't envy them at all, because they literally, as you say, had to play through it several times, you know, taking different paths and choices and what have you. But I will say it was invaluable. The copy editors, both in the UK and in the US, did spot a few errors. You know, they were like, oh, actually, you know, you've got a bit here that doesn't go to the right place, or this clue doesn't make sense, that kind of thing. You got a bit of continuity. You say this here, but then you say it again 3 sections later. And so actually the copy editors were golden. They really, really did a fantastic job. None of them had ever, none of the editors, nor copy editors, nor proofreaders had ever worked on anything like this before. So it was a learning experience for all of us. I had written stuff like this before, but not since I was a child, because I grew up reading those choose your own adventure books and the fighting fantasy books and the lone wolf books and all that sort of stuff. So I had a go at writing those sorts of things myself when I was a child. And that's partly what led me to get involved in role-playing games and then video games and what have you. But yeah, it had been many years since I'd actually written something like that. But those editors had never, none of them, because, nobody's really been publishing anything like this since the 90s. Yeah. So unless you were working as an editor in the 90s, when would you have had the opportunity to? So yeah, it was a learning experience for everyone. But as I say, I want to emphasize everybody did a fantastic job. Yeah, I'm very proud of the book, and part of that is because the editors did such a fantastic job sort of keeping everything on track and helping me, develop it into the best thing it could be.
I'm imagining the editors having a very video gamey experience too, where like, okay, now I'm going to do a good cop run, and now I have to do the bad cop run to make sure I get all the different parts of the story.
Yeah, well, or now I'm going to follow this suspect and assume that they did it and see where that takes me. Sort of keep harassing them at every opportunity you get. Now I'll do it with the other suspect, and so on. And as you say, there are 6 suspects in this book, so that was quite a task.
It just gives it such an interesting reread value, because there are tons of books in my life that I have read multiple times, but it is, despite the changes in my wisdom and age, like the same book every time I approach it. This, you can reread it and just have like a different reading experience every time. And I think it's a lot of fun.
Well, and that's partly why there's a scoring system at the back as well, is to encourage people to do that, so that even if they do solve it, they might only have done so by the skin of their teeth. And so you can check your score, and if it's, sort of low to medium, you can go back and try and improve your score by getting more of the relevant clues in order, on your sort of path to becoming a master detective. So yes, it's very much designed, even if you succeed and you do solve the murder, it's very much designed for you to be able to go back and do it again, take completely different paths and try and improve your score.
I have one important question for my own brain. Is this going to be a standalone or a series, or maybe another book like it without the same characters, of course?
My plan at the moment, I actually just literally started writing it this week as we're talking, is to write, I have a 2-book contract in the UK. So my plan is to write another book using the same characters, the same police characters, but with a different scenario, different murder, and so on. The US, I'm not sure about. I think that's I probably shouldn't say anything because I think that's being, sort of talked about at the moment. But certainly, as I say, I have a 2-book deal in the UK. So fingers crossed, yes, there will be a second with those same characters.
Cool. If it never comes to the US, I will buy it from the UK. That is fine.
Yeah, that's great. I can't wait to see what I get up to in the next novel.
Yeah, I've been really busy. I didn't even have time to go to be like policing schools and this and that. This is amazing.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your book with us. It was such a fun reading experience. And we've loved this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yay.
Okay, listeners, it's up to you now. Please check out Can You Solve the Murder and find out, can you solve it? By the time that you hear this, it'll be out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for books. All right, it's time to close this.
There is also an audiobook version.
Ooh.
Which I mention it because a lot of people assume there isn't, but no, we have made an audiobook version. It's done using chapter selection.
Ah,
yeah, they've done a really great job, actually. Yeah, so I just want to make sure, people who prefer audiobooks, you are catered for as well.
Nice. Yes, thank you for adding that in. That's a very valuable.
Wow.
What a cool experience.
Probably not a book to drive to since you have to write stuff down.
No. Or jog.
Yeah. You're like, Awesome. Well, thank you again. This has been really lovely. And it is time to close this chapter. Bye-bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.